Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Michelle Beck. I am a two-time, almost 10-year survivor of breast cancer. I'm the patient programs assistant at Breast Friends of Oregon. And when I have time, you can find me on social media at I Never Liked Pink. So today, I'm so thrilled to welcome our guest. I was introduced to her by a dear friend of mine who is in the industry. And it's so funny being in Portland saying that. People are like, what industry? Like logging? No, she is in the entertainment arts theatrical. So her name is Brianna Barrett. She is a playwright, screenwriter, performance artist, and an almost 10-year survivor of Hodgkin's lymphoma. And we're going to talk today about her journey and what it means to be an artist when you're diagnosed and diagnosed young, when you feel like you're in the prime of your life and you've got everything going on, and then bam, cancer. And she is also really working on how she's been paying a lot of attention to how young cancer survivors, thrivers are portrayed in the media and in the arts and what that looks like, because it's really, for those of us who've been there, it's not accurate, because we see people who are diagnosed and then they're like, oh, and then life just doesn't go on, or they're not living their fullest life, where for many that's not the case. And so we're going to talk about that today. So Brianna, welcome. Thank you for being here today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? The non-cancer part, we'll get there.
Okay, sure. Well, I was born in Portland, Oregon. I grew up in Tigard.
Oh my
I'm,
gosh, that's where I live, in
oh my
Tigard.
gosh. Oh, wow. Okay, we have a lot of
It's
Tigard
really a
talk to
small world.
do. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and like you said, I'm a playwright and storyteller primarily. I hesitate to call myself a screenwriter yet because the amount of actual paid work I've gotten in that field is pretty minimal thus far. But I'm making the rounds right now with a pilot that I wrote with a friend, and those meetings are leading to more meetings, and it's all been pretty exciting. And nobody does any of these jobs for the money anyway, or almost nobody. So I guess I'll say,
I work at a nonprofit, so I understand
yeah.
that.
So really, yeah, I'll officially call myself, I'm a writer, I'm an occasional performer of my own work. Yeah.
I fully embrace calling yourself a screenwriter because you're putting it out there. I call myself an author, and my book is not published yet, but I'm working on it. So that's,
I
it's
appreciate that. Yeah,
you're
I mean, we shouldn't let the financial aspect of it define who we are and how we identify.
exactly. And, I've had a few articles published in magazines, so I consider myself an author. So we're going to go with that. So you're also a screenwriter because you're getting there. And oh my gosh, I can't wait for the pilot. And we'll talk a tiny bit about that later. I know there's
Absolutely.
some part of it is still under wraps. But so when did you know that you wanted to be in this field, whether it was on stage or behind the scenes? How did that start? Because Portland is not the area where like, oh, jump into the arts and, and do that.
Yeah, I mean, I always knew that I wanted to be a writer. I didn't know what field I wanted to write in. I thought I wanted to be a novelist, I guess, when I was in the third grade. That
That's
was
pretty
my
big
dream.
aspirations when you're like 8.
Yeah, I had an amazing third grade teacher who would take it upon herself to hardbound, like self-publish a copy of any book that was finished in her class. And she had a little library of previous students, like books.
She's a
And I
hero.
she's a hero. I was like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. Like, I want to be in this library. I'm gonna be a writer. And I was so this is really telling about my personality, that I was so fixated on getting it perfect that I never actually finished. And for all of fourth grade, I was still working on my novel. Uh,
That's the problem with many of us, actually. It's we're so focused on perfection. My husband is like, you just have to let it go. Just put it out there, and it is what it is. Otherwise, you're never going to finish because you're like, oh, well, that's wrong. And this needs to be funnier. And I need more emphasis here. And he's like, just do it.
yeah, exactly. So I didn't learn that lesson for a long time. I was still trying to write a book for a long time. I was like, maybe she'll still publish it. It's like, well, you're not in third grade anymore. So uh yeah, but yeah, I mean, Then I took a film class in high school, which was amazing that my high school had a film class, and that was really life-changing. And yeah, I just realized that's like a direction I wanted to go in my life. I got really obsessed with it. I've always been super obsessed with stand-up comedy, so I knew I wanted to write comedy at some point. A lot of the films that I made in high school were really overly earnest and cringy, but a lot of them are also extremely funny. I think they kind of hold up. So
I think the idea of being able to do stand-up comedy and improv, that is so fascinating to me because my brain doesn't work like that. Like there are moments when I think I'm funny and I come up with good things, but honestly, I can't remember a joke to save my life. But I want to be on stage. I just want to be talking and sharing about my personal life because who doesn't want to do that? Actually, most people, but
actually most people,
most
it's
people I
ranked to
know.
like the top fear that human beings have next
It
to
was
spiders, which is much less
oh,
threatening, I
oh,
think.
spiders are 100% my worst fear. But it wasn't until I was diagnosed with cancer the second time around that I decided, oh my gosh, I want to talk about this and be super passionate and talk about how I got through. And this is where I ended up. So I've been hosting this podcast for almost 2 years and you can't shut me up. So
That makes sense to me. I mean, my first time performing on stage was at a fundraiser show called Notes of Hope, which raises money for young adult cancer patient services at OHSU. And I'd never done anything like that before. And just because of my love of stand-up comedy, I took it upon myself to write what I thought was a pretty funny set about my experience with cancer. And people really responded to it. And I was like, maybe I should do this more.
I will have to say there is something super like I'm a Leo, so I love being the center of attention. But literally being on stage and getting applause and people clapping for you, that's freaking the best. Anything I can do to do that, like I will take it. But so you mentioned your cancer journey. Let's talk about that. You were diagnosed early 20s with Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I was. I'd been living in LA at the time, pitching a TV show that I
Because
had
that's where you got to
written.
go to make it happen.
Because that's where you got to go to make it happen. And it was like it was I think thanks to the Affordable Care Act, I think I had just re-qualified to be on my parents' insurance because I was under 26. Like the previous year, which I gotta say is like a life-saving thing that happened in my life. And yeah, I was home in Oregon for the holidays, and I had I had been having really persistent chest pain and neck pain, and it was increasing while I was there for the holidays, to the point that I like would wake up in the morning and not be able to turn my neck. And like I don't know how long this is going on that I overlooked it, but I also had like quite a visible lump growing out of the side of my neck. And my dad was like, you should
Yeah,
see
you should get that checked
you
out.
should get that checked out. And I went to his doctor because I didn't have a doctor in Oregon anymore. But things moved pretty quickly after that. I got my CT scan results the day before Christmas, and they were like, this doesn't look good. We're going to need to do a biopsy the day after Christmas.
Merry fucking Christmas. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Christmas was awkward that year in 2012. And I thought we were going to not mention it to anyone for Christmas. And then my mom awkwardly blurted it out at the dinner table. And my little brother, who's 2 years younger than me, he's also an adult, just starts crying. I've never seen him cry before. And I was just like, well, cool. This is going well.
The good news is, I don't know if many of you don't know, Hodgkin's lymphoma, when caught early, is very treatable with chemotherapy and radiation. It's literally one of the most treatable cancers, depending on when it's caught. And you were diagnosed literally at the primary time. It's late teens, 20s, and even into the early 30s, where it's very common, or over 75. So it's really strange the way it works in your body. So it's like, I'm 51, rare that I'm going to get that. It's just because of the age. But unfortunately, you were one of the unlucky ones. But 10 years later, you're rocking it. So obviously treatment went well. What did you go through?
Yeah, it was all chemotherapy. Originally, we were going to
Okay.
do chemo and radiation, and then I guess some other scan results came back in, and I had too many different tumor locations to target radiation, so we just switched it to doing double the amount of chemotherapy. Um,
Yay.
yeah, honestly, like I didn't really understand the implications of that choice when my doctor was explaining it to me, but the research that I've done on radiation since, I'm pretty happy I got to skip that.
Mhm.
Not the chemotherapy is a walk in the park. I could have loved to skip that too, but we had to do something. So yeah, I mean, I felt like I was in really good hands. I was treated at the Night Cancer Institute. Um,
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Phil. You make some weird choices, but that was one of the good ones you made.
Exactly.
Uh, let's talk about politics. No, but yeah, it was comforting to know. I mean, if you're gonna get diagnosed with cancer, it is comforting to be diagnosed with a cancer where everyone's like, "Oh, we know what to do with this one." Like you're not
Mhm.
rolling into an experimental trial or something. It's like, no, we have like a pretty well researched course of treatment for this, and so no one was like, "Oh no, what are we gonna do?" And I have a lot of friends who definitely have had it the other way where it's a lot of like, we've never seen this before, or like, you know, yeah, you're kind of patient zero on this one, and like that's terrifying. So that's why cancer research is important, so more people get to have that experience of doctors saying like, don't worry, we know,
Mhm.
we've researched and we know what to do.
Yeah, we've got you. I'm very lucky. Both times I was diagnosed, it is the quote unquote best breast cancer to have, the most treatable, stage 1 both times. I've gone through a lot, but I'm incredibly lucky. And I, have so many friends and who unfortunately have not been so lucky. And I count my blessings every day, even though I've had cancer twice and, life happens, but I'm here and I get to talk about it with amazing people like you. So once you went through your cancer, when did you decide, like, I need to kind of incorporate this into my career and what I'm writing about? How did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, it happened steadily. I mean, part of it is that I did that benefit show. That was probably a year after I was diagnosed, the Notes of Hope fundraiser, where I was asked to speak at this event, and I also was simultaneously told about this filmmaker who was making a documentary about young adults with cancer, and they were like, "Can he like film you giving your speech and then interview you the next day for his movie?" I think that's because I had been making a YouTube series. I'm telling the story really backwards. I mean, I realized that I needed to incorporate it in my art as soon as it happens.
Okay.
I
Because it's a
mean,
big part of who you are.
I was working on a video. I was editing a Christmas present that I was editing for my dad, which was a video of a road trip that we went on. So I was at my computer. I was at my brother's computer actually, because I was in Portland. I was at my brother's computer, and like my camera was right there, and like I got the call from my doctor being like, we think that you have cancer. And I turned on the camera. I filmed him saying that
Mm.
to me on the phone. And I started working on documenting that experience. I made a YouTube series while I was in treatment. Um, that followed me from the minute I heard that news until the minute I got a separate call from him saying we could cancel our upcoming chemotherapy because my scan results looked good. And yeah, so it was an instinct to process the experience through the lens of storytelling immediately. I don't know that I even thought about it that much. It's weird because I was previously a very private person, and now was like, I'm going to tell the world about my medical history, and now it's online forever.
I
But it
100% feel you.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what happened with me as well. My first time I went through, I did a private Facebook group and invited friends and family, and then, just gave updates and such. And then the second time around, I had gone to a luncheon with at Breast Friends where I work, and I was so inspired. And I'm like, screw it. I want to tell everybody everything because it could help someone, even if it helps one person. And so it's like overnight, I just flipped the switch. I started a website and I put my blog there and I started writing more. And it's like, yes, I'm an oversharer. Here's everything about my life. And my husband is still like, can some things be private? I'm like, no, not really.
Yeah, if you've heard my podcast, my boyfriend has the same complaint. Yeah, like there's beauty in being an oversharer. And I didn't realize it at the time. I think I probably started broadcasting my cancer to the internet because I didn't want to have to explain it over and over again to every individual
Yes,
person I knew.
because
And
that's exhausting.
it is exhausting. I was like, I
Mhm.
don't want to tell everyone I have cancer. I just want to send them all a video where I say, guess what, guys, I have cancer. Because that seemed a little more personal, I guess, than just posting it on Facebook. I don't know. I didn't really think that closely about it. And I didn't realize at the time that the kind of the secondary benefit that would become the primary benefit was, that it would connect me to a wider community of cancer survivors, which is an amazing community that I don't think you realize exists until you join the club.
Yeah, it's the club that no one ever wants to join, but has the best members. Now, you said you've known many people who are patient zero and unlucky, and or just, have different types of cancers and whatever. Was that after your performing at the fundraiser and like with OHSU, or was it kind of through your work that you started to meet other young adults who had been diagnosed with various things?
It's everything. I mean, when I was diagnosed, I was fortunate enough that OHSU had like a somewhat robust young adult patient services department, which I don't think exists anymore due to funding issues. But at the time, I got a call from a social worker inviting me to like join the support group for young adults with cancer. And like from there, I got introduced to the writing group at OHSU, where you could just hang out with other young adults who like writing and write about kind of anything but cancer if you felt like it. And there's also in Oregon a great organization called Project Koru who does like adventure camps for young adults with cancer.
Oh, yeah. Someone in one of my groups just got back from like Costa Rica or something like that with Koru.
Amazing. Yeah,
I
yeah,
was
yeah.
like,
They've really expanded.
mm-hmm.
When I was like camp 12 or something, and now they're at like 50 something. But yeah, when I did it, you'd go surfing in Hawaii, in Maui, and I'd never been to Hawaii before, and I thought that sounded cool. So I was like, oh, I can go to Hawaii for a week, expenses paid, like, because I had cancer. Like, let's do it. I have no interest in surfing. The one time I ever tried surfing before in my life, I was immediately hit in the face with my surfboard and just like
Oh gosh.
bled and had a fat lip for weeks. And I had to get 2 root canals to fix my dead tooth. So I was like, I'm going to fake an injury real fast and
Yeah,
just
no
hang out on the
surfing for me,
beach.
but I'm getting a free trip to Hawaii.
That's what I thought. But they make you surf. And by the end of that week, I was like standing on my board and like catching waves, which was pretty remarkable. And I was, like, I think a lot of people come into that just being like, I want a free trip. I don't really want to make friends with other cancer survivors because, like, I don't want to be emotionally invested in a group of friends who are like not doing well. That sounds emotionally harrowing, and I just got over my own emotional trauma. But like, you meet a lot of really amazing people, and you do form a really special bond with people who share that life experience. And I've had several friends from that trip who have passed away, and um that always sucks, but it doesn't make those relationships less valuable. So yeah, I dived in for many years making friends in
Mhm.
the cancer community through many different means. I traveled the country working on a documentary about cancer survivors with a director, Hernan Baranga, who's really amazing. Um, I worked with him again on this documentary about how to talk to your friends who have cancer, where we interviewed cancer patients and their friends, which was incredible. And yeah, I've written plays, I've performed my own solo show, where invariably somebody will come up to you afterwards and be like, this reminds me of my own experience, which is
Mhm.
incredible. Shout out to oversharers again. I mean, like when you overshare, people will overshare back at you. And it's, to me, I love that. Like I'm bad at
That's a basis for connection. And we are going
yeah.
to jump out for a quick break, Brianna. But when we get back, I want to dig into your solo show and the documentary. So get ready for that. So listeners, please stay with us. If you would like to make a donation to Breast Friends, you can do so on our website or by texting BF Radio to 41444. If you or a loved one need our services, please go to breastfriends.org and check out patient programs to see what we can do for you. Stay with us. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back. I'm Michelle Beck. My guest is Brianna Barrett, and we are talking, well, we haven't gotten there a lot yet, but we are going to dig into how young adults are portrayed in the arts and in media when they're diagnosed young with cancer. And so, Brianna, you were talking about all the things you did pretty after you were diagnosed, and you have the theatrical writer background. And so you decided to develop your own solo show. So tell us about that. How did that come about, and what came from it and all the stuff?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know it, but I think I started developing that show at the fundraiser I was talking about, because they did 20 minutes there that ended up getting reworked over the years, and eventually became kind of the basis for my 80-minute solo show, which was also a multimedia show. So I utilize a lot of the footage or a lot of the outtakes from my YouTube series. So it's the concept of this show is that I'm on stage with my computer editing a video, and I'm like scrolling through a Premiere timeline and pulling up different clips, and like those clips are reminding me of different stories, and I'm telling stories, or like I'm telling a story and then I go find the clip. So it's it's really a dance between me and this footage from my life, which I think is really cool because you get to see me on stage talking to you, but you also get to see me as a
Living
third
your story.
grader,
Yeah.
and yeah, losing my hair, and like, yeah, you really feel like you watch my whole life kind of flash before your eyes. Um, so yeah, I mean, um, that's that's the show. And like I said, I mean, it was received well. People were coming up to talk to me about their own experiences afterwards, which was really amazing. And it's really scary and surreal. Um, you have to think about your own story in a different way. Certainly, you have to push through the fear that's like, why would anyone want to listen to me talk for this long? Or maybe not push through it. I mean, it's a real question. You've got to give people a reason to listen to you. You've got to make that investment of their time worth it. I really don't believe in subjecting an audience to my therapy. I really think that you probably shouldn't write a story about your trauma until you're sure that you're doing it more for an audience than for yourself. And it took me several years because I didn't start performing the solo show as a show until several years out of treatment, which
I
I think
think
was also good.
you have to get to a place where you're not still living fresh in the trauma, that
Absolutely.
you can you've passed through, you're done with treatment, you've done therapy if needed, which 100% I recommend to everyone for everything. And you need to be it needs to sit well in your soul before you can share, I think, that on stage in the right way. I mean, you can write it out and plan for it, but you have to be in a good place to go back and revisit it over and over again, essentially. Now, oh my God, I literally had a good question and it just went. Where can listeners how do they find your YouTube series if it's still there?
Yeah, great question. My name on YouTube is Weird Sounding Voice. So I think it's just youtube.com/weird sounding voice. And I have a playlist that's called Cancerland. That's all, where I've combined all of the cancer videos, because I've made a lot of other videos just for funsies over the years. But yeah, you can see the YouTube series. And also that first show, someone was nice enough to take a video of me doing that first show that I ever did on stage, and that's on my YouTube as well.
Was that the one at OHSU or your first solo show based on these
the
series?
one at the fundraiser for OHSU?
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just like 20 minutes. I've never filmed a full version of me doing the full solo show. I kind of regret that because I don't know that I want to ever do the show again. Which is how, like when I did the show at Bag and Baggage, and then they later commissioned me to make a podcast version of the show during the pandemic because they were looking for online content. And I did in my mind kind of think like, okay, this is me like retiring this story in a way, like it'll exist as like something people can listen to. But it does get tiring after a while till, there's a part in the show where I say like, I have cancer. And it's tiring to rehearse and perform yourself in present tense, living the moment of like, and then I found out I have cancer. So that I think it's interesting. The podcast ended up kind of being a retrospective of the experience of performing your trauma in that way. And it kind of gets into the crazy makingness of having to say it over and over again. So
what is the podcast called?
It's called True Love and Other Non-Communicable Diseases.
That is amazing.
Thank you.
So I'm trying to write it down so I don't forget. Okay. So
you can also go to my website, briannabarrett.com/podcast,
which has everything.
Which has everything. Yeah.
Now, when the first time you were able to, you got up on stage to perform this whole show, did it feel like the end of like, okay, I'm kind of finishing out my cancer story, or did you know that you wanted to continue working on different things going forward, because that is part of the pilot? Can I say that has to do with cancer?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question, and I think it's one that like evolves over time as you get.
Oh no, one of us lost. This is the beauty of live
survivors.
Oh, there we go. I lost me for a second, or I lost you. So go. Sorry, start that question over, please.
Okay, sure. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it says unstable connection. Yeah, what was I saying? Yeah, well, I was saying it's kind of a conversation that comes up more with other veteran cancer survivors as you get further and further away from treatment, is this idea that like your cancer narrative doesn't really end. I think in media there is more of a focus on like cancer stories. If we get any stories about our experience, they're usually about diagnosis and treatment and probably dying. And there's not a lot of blueprints or ways to talk about or think about, being 10 years, 20 years, it's still a part of your experience, like the experience of being a cancer survivor who is not actively in treatment. Or, I have a lot of friends who are, for their lives kind of actively in some kind of maintenance or treatment. And those stories of being a ways out from that initial diagnosis, I think are really important and interesting. So, when I first started performing the story of my diagnosis and treatment, I had no way to know that, 6-7 years later, I'd be like, oh, this story doesn't feel as important to me anymore as the story about, like what do
life after
life after is deserving of representation. Because if you can't see someone doing it, you can't picture yourself doing it,
100%. And we talk about that all the time, how for many who go through a cancer diagnosis, the period of survivorship after active treatment is incredibly hard because, like you said, there is no blueprint for it. And it is not represented on stage or on TV or in movies. You don't see that. Like all we see is diagnosis and treatment, and you lose your hair and you look like an alien because you're so like, there's nothing going on right in your body at that time. And either they make a miraculous recovery or they die. And
Yes.
then it stops. And that is not how life works. And I love that you are with your art trying to show the different perspective of that. That's pretty amazing. Now talk about the documentary that you worked on, please, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. I mean, I was a videographer for a documentary called Cancer Rebellion, which was directed by Hernan Brangen, who also appears in the documentary. He's amazing. He's one of my best friends now, but I met him, like I said before, he was the documentarian who wanted to just like come and interview me in Oregon, because his whole thing was interviewing a cancer survivor in all 50 states. Which he did, and that's the subject of the documentary. But we literally we met, and my story was about how I am a filmmaker, and so like a month or two later, he was just like looking for someone to like go on the road with him to do a bunch of interviews in the Midwest, and I was like,
Pick me.
I met you for one day, and I guess I'll sign up to like be on the road with you for a month. And it was amazing. You don't bond with someone the way you bond
On a road trip.
on a
Mhm.
road trip for a month, talking to people about their cancer. And it was like, I mean, we met people in parts of the country that I would probably never have any reason to go to, that I'm so glad I was able to experience, and people who are living these incredible stories, and who in a lot of parts of the country feel kind of a lack of community and a lack of representation. And I remember meeting this kid who was a high school student, Billings, Montana, who was like, I'm the only person in Montana with my cancer. And that's not true, but like that's how it
That's how it
feels.
feels.
It's very
Mhm.
isolating, especially when there aren't, like those community resources to connect people. Um, yeah, it was like exciting for him to meet other cancer survivors, which, was a common experience. But, it's crazy though. Like I was still not far out from my own diagnosis, and I learned sort of gaps in, things that some people learn in their diagnosis that I didn't learn. I think we were in Fargo when we were interviewing this woman who was in the hospital getting treated for Hodgkin's lymphoma. And
Mhm.
she mentioned that a hard thing about coping with her treatment was the fact that she'll probably be infertile. And I had literally never heard that before. Like my doctors didn't
Wow.
discuss fertility with me at all. So I was kind of like,
What the hell?
oh,
It's like a slap
say
in the face.
say
Yeah.
more about that. Yeah, her doctors had gone over, like, do you want to freeze your eggs and all this stuff. I was like, wow, no, nobody mentioned that to me. I'm learning this for the first time. I didn't tell her that, but I did go out
Right.
into the hallway and just be like, what the fuck just happened?
Your heart
Like,
starts
what?
palpitating and like you're like, oh, let's just
Yeah.
not think about this right
Yeah.
now.
I was like, all right, there's some gaps in communication here. That's
Well,
fascinating.
definitely
So
finding community and people who get it. We talk about that all the time, is being heard and seen by someone who gets it is so important to move forward and move beyond your diagnosis, because otherwise you do feel so isolated and it makes it so much worse. Like, I mean, that poor kid in Billings, and he's like, I'm the only one. And it's like, well, you're probably not, but you don't have that connection. So I'm sure even just meeting you and the documentarian was amazing for him, because he's like, oh, there are other people out there like this. And that's pretty awesome. So we are going to jump out for another short break. Listeners, if you would like to be my guest or share your warrior story, you can email me at michellebeck@breastfriends.org and would love to hear or just to say hi. So thanks so much. We'll be back in a minute. Thanks for staying with us. I'm Michelle Beck. My guest is Brianna Barrett, and we are talking about her journey being diagnosed young with Hodgkin's lymphoma and her artistry after that. Now, Brianna, we briefly mentioned a pilot, and we are going to talk about that. But I want to it's kind of a multi-layered question, so bear with me. So I know you've written a play about cancer for a high school. You wrote a play about cancer for your Master of Fine Arts thesis, and so you've done these things, and do you ever want to write about something that's not cancer?
Yeah, I mean,
But I guess it's what you know, so that it informs your writing. And I'm sure you've done other things, but do you kind of find yourself always going back to that as like a thread in your stories?
yeah, I mean, I would never want to be painted into a box where all I can write about
You're
is
just the cancer
cancer.
writer.
Yeah, even though that is definitely an experience that shapes my worldview and to some extent probably impacts any story that I'm going to tell. Um, but yeah, I mean, in recent years, um, I think I write a lot about grief and loss and um I don't know, a lot of, like I'm compelled by stories about illness and living with illness. Um, but I'm also, like I'm a big history nerd. I like writing history plays. No one was getting diagnosed with cancer yet in the 1860s, so that's like a cool place to talk about
Yeah.
feminism instead.
They
Uh,
just died because they didn't know what it was. Mm-hmm.
for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I'm super glad I wasn't alive then, but I do love researching it and putting myself in that world and in the context of fiction. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's really rewarding and also really exhausting to write plays that are especially plays that are from your firsthand experience. I mean, my MFA thesis was hard for a lot of reasons. It's a very vulnerable subject matter, and it was a comedy, and I was doing it during the pandemic. So I really, truly had never heard it aloud until opening night of the show in front of a paying audience, and I had no idea how they would react. But with that particular play, it's a body swap comedy about a drug addict and a cancer patient who switch bodies. And in writing it, I'm processing a lot of grief over the death of two of my close friends, one to drugs and one to cancer.
Okay.
And I mean, that's why I write comedy, because I already walk out of that rehearsal room feeling pretty stressed and vulnerable. And so if there weren't any jokes, I can only imagine how much harder I'd be taking it. But it's still a hard thing to hear people repeat over and over and over again in a rehearsal process. So sometimes you're just like,
Yeah.
I can't hate on a frivolous play sometimes. That seems fun. I
So
need to write one
then,
of those.
but you are in talks you're working on a pilot with a friend. Can you tell us, I know we can't talk all the details, but can you tell us a little bit about that and what brought it up?
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. My writing partner is a really funny stand-up comedian named Becky Brownstein, who performs in Portland. She's in Portland right now. She's getting ready to move to LA, but she's been a fixture of the Portland stand-up scene for a long time, and she tours all around the country, doing comedy festivals. She's been in a lot of TV shows, and I met her at that very first support group that I ever went to at OHSU when I was like a month into treatment, and she was
So
still in
she's
treatment
also
at
a
the time.
survivor. Okay.
She's also a survivor. Yeah,
Mhm.
she has thyroid cancer. She's fighting it still to this day. But we were both much earlier in our cancer journeys when we met 10 years ago almost. And yeah, I mean, it took a long time. I always wanted to collaborate with her because she's the one who told me about the writing group at OHSU, and I was in that group with her for a while, and it was like, damn, she's a really good writer. And then the second year that I did the Notes of Hope concert, when I was returning as a story coach as opposed to a storyteller, I was coaching other people in telling their stories on stage. She was the MC, and she told this amazing, hilarious story about her own cancer experience. And I was just like, oh, it is my dream to collaborate together someday on something. And she was like, that'd be amazing. And then last summer, she was like, let's finally do it. Like, I don't know. She was at the time talking about being frustrated about, some audition that didn't go well or something, and like, oh, they're not the roles that I want to play. And I was like, well, who do you want to play? Like, let's write a show for you. She's also, she's a talented actor. And so we wrote this pilot. It's about a cancer support group, because that's our lived experience,
because that's what you
together.
know. And what you writing about what you know for me is the easiest. Like I still have this, I had a surgical hysterectomy. Or surgical menopause. Sorry. Yes, it was a surgical hysterectomy. This is the way my cancer brain works. But I think it was Suzanne Summers created the quote of the 7 dwarves of menopause, and it's like itchy, bitchy, sleepy, grumpy, like all of these things. And like I'm writing about that because this is what I know. You write what you know, and throwing in comedy is literally what makes it palatable, because no one really wants to read about menopause.
Totally. Yeah. And like, it is funny. Like there is obviously the drama of the life and death stakes, which are present in our show as well. Although we're pretty committed to the idea that none of the main cast ever dies. A lot of the cast, they're still in a support group, but they've been done with their treatment experience for years. Some of them are newer to the cancer experience and community. And so, I mean, it's just like a great way to get this disparate group of people from different walks of life and different worldviews into the same room, kind of forced to be in community with each other. And so they all come at it from a different perspective, and like their lives have all been interrupted by cancer in different ways and are being reshaped by cancer in different ways. Some of them want to be advocates, some of them aren't that interested. It's kind of examining all of the different ways that long-term survivorship can look, and how it impacts, finding your next job, or like going on your next date, like how you think about your future, like if you can move to a new town, like if you have to take this job because you need health insurance. It's just like, it's all of the struggles that young adults face. All of our characters are in their 20s and 30s, and like, I mean, we joke that it's like Friends, if the reason they're friends is cancer. Like they're all just still trying to like start their careers and find love, but like it's also complicated by this other thing that they're dealing with.
Now, where is that in the process?
Well, we have been pitching it to different networks and studios. We were the winners of this competition called the Yes and Laughter Lab, where first they flew us to New York. There were 20 finalists who were flown to New York to do a pitch in New York. And then of those, 6 of us were chosen to do this pitch in LA, which was in September. And so, we pitched it on stage at Dynasty Typewriter in LA to an audience of different agents and managers and development execs from different networks and production companies. And so from that, we've kind of just been going the rounds, doing a lot of meetings, both with networks like ABC and Netflix and Comedy Central and production companies. Literally,
you need to find executives who actually are cancer survivors, because you understand it so much more after you've been through it, and how relevant it would be. Because like I said, like in many households, there is someone who's been diagnosed with cancer, and we need comedy. We need so much more comedy in our lives at this point, especially coming out of the pandemic. So definitely we'll have fingers crossed for that. And so you're pitching this series. We're working on better, more accurate representation, which we don't have at this point. or
Yeah.
survivorship. But something that you've also done in the past is you went to the writing group at OHSU, but you've also facilitated writing workshops for survivors at OHU and other places. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I actually took over the writing group that I started being a member in when the facilitator was leaving Oregon,
Mhm.
moving to Massachusetts, I believe. She trained me to sort of take over the group because I was a few years out from treatment then, and I had been doing different patient advocacy at the time and telling my story on different stages for different cancer organizations. And yeah, somehow she was convinced I would be a good facilitator. And yeah, I mean, it is definitely a very different experience being the one who's holding space for other people rather than being the one who's coming into the space to explore your own feelings. I found I had to be really attentive to kind of suss out the mood of the room each week and what I could bring to it that would help other people open up or feel seen or feel welcomed or destigmatized or whatever it is I felt that people needed from moment to moment. Often you have different people who have very different needs, and you're trying to figure out how to not alienate anyone and make us all still feel like a group who's all having an experience together. So yeah, I mean, I learned a lot about group facilitation, and from that definitely went on to facilitate workshops for other organizations.
Because like you said, it is a very different place than being the little fledgling writer who's trying to get out the feelings. And then you're like, oh, I'm on the other side of it now. And you have to be, like you said, responsive to the mood in the room and what all those little fledgling writers in the room need. And that's a hard choice or a hard,
Yeah.
hard position to be in. So it's obviously something you love and you're very passionate about because cancer has so become a part of your career trajectory that you're allowing others to, whether it's their career or just a hobby, to write it all out. And it's so important.
Yeah, I'm like really excited that one of our longtime group members has also joined the Portland Storytellers Guild and is like telling stories on stage and has gotten a lot more confident as a writer and performer. And I don't think that's something that she ever really saw herself doing before she joined the group. So yeah, stories like that are really exciting to sort of watch play out. Because I do think that there's a lot of power in telling your own story. There's actually a lot of research behind that, like being able to sort of reframe your traumatic experiences into a narrative is so healing and so therapeutic and also so helpful for other people and does continue to instill a sense of community, which is, yeah, I think really important.
So other than fingers crossed for the pilot, what is up next for you?
Oh man. I do really want to sell this TV show and change the world and
I love that. That's the best answer. I'm
bet
changing the world. That's where I'm going.
I'm trying to change the world. I'm trying to give us better, cancer representation than, Walter White if he's going to be a role model, which I'd suggest he really shouldn't be. Like I thought it was pretty startling when I was diagnosed and realized there's just like, yeah, it's really just a plot device to kill someone off most of the time. And there's not a lot of role models, especially in our age demographic. So, and there's a lot of people who are writers and are telling this story. My dream of all dreams is to make this TV show and have a writer's room staffed entirely with cancer survivors. So it can really be a show that's from the perspective of people who have lived that experience rather than yet another narrative about, what
Well,
you learned from watching someone suffer,
when it happens, I want to come in and be a guest writer, or even just I want to be like in the room one day. So we are out of time, but Brianna, tell our listeners where they can find you and follow you on socials.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to see my other work is to go to my website, briannabarrett.com. I'm not great at social media. I go through phases of remembering to post stuff there. But I am a big fan of actively engaging with people and talking to them, not just like passively following people and following them back. So, if you send me a message on the social media, I'll definitely talk to you. Like, I think
Perfect.
that's the value.
Okay, well, we are out of time, Brianna. So thank you so much. Listeners, if you or a loved one need our services, please go to breastfriends.org. Make sure you go find Brianna Barrett and follow all of her stuff. And fingers crossed for the pilot. If you'd like to donate to Breast Friends, you can text BF Radio to 41444. You can find us on all the podcast platforms and also on the Voice America Health and Wellness channel. And you can watch it on YouTube. So we will be back next week. And until then, remember, we rise by lifting each other.